Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Tanner Hoops. Tanner is the voice of Minnesota Gopher Volleyball, and he's also the voice of the University of Minnesota's football in terms of the studio host. And he's also an old friend of mine back from the Northwoods League. Tanner, thank you so much for joining me, and hope you've had a good start to 2022 so far.
Hey, Billy, it's always a pleasure. Always good to talk to you and reminisce about our old days in the North and the Northwoods League. And boy, I tell you, it's been a great start to me in 2022 and hopefully for you as well.
Yeah, for sure. For those who don't know, Tanner, me and Tanner both go back to our days in the Northwoods League, a summer collegiate baseball league. Broadcasting there, Tanner was with the Duluth Huskies and I was with the Lacrosse Loggers, and we've kept in touch. Although actually this is the first time I think we've done a Zoom since I looked back. I think it was July 2020. I think it was right after July 4th weekend. So it doesn't feel like it's been a year and a half, although I know we've definitely kept in touch. So very excited to get to talk to you and talk about your new role, because you were in a different role last time. So we'll get to that. But Tanner, let's get right to what we were going to talk about today, and that is recapping all the craziness that has happened in the NFL with the playoffs last couple of days. But I think we have to start with, because he was that exceptional of an athlete, when he retires, that trumps the NFL playoffs in the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, and that is the greatest quarterback of all time in many people's eyes. Tom Brady officially announced his retirement today. For those who don't know, a couple of days ago, Adam Schefter and Jeff Darlington of ESPN reported that he was going to retire, and there was kind of some pushback in the sense that his camp had said that he had not yet made up his mind, but today he officially comes out with his post and says he is retiring. I mean, really, look at all the accolades this guy has. 22 years in the NFL, 7-time Super Bowl champion, more than any franchise in the NFL. He went to the Super Bowl 10 out of the 22 seasons he played. I mean, Tanner, just a remarkable career. I mean, this really shows you how long he played, because we were really young when he won his first Super Bowl. Now all of a sudden he's retiring at 44 and we're in our 20s. So what's just kind of your thoughts on just Tom Brady retiring and just the great career that he had?
Yeah, it just feels like a change into the guard, Billy. I saw the graphic today. I'm sure a lot of your followers have seen it on social media with Brady, the Mannings. Ben Roethlisberger announced his retirement Thursday. Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, and there's 14 titles between those 6. They were a big part of both of our upbringings and our lives as sports fans. And they're all gone. They're making way for a new wave of young quarterbacks. I know we're excited about them, but anytime your childhood, it goes into the history book, so to speak. It definitely makes you feel a little nostalgic. But specifically with Tom Brady, he may not have been the most talented guy to ever play the game, but nobody wanted to win as bad as he did. Nobody gave himself the edge or put him in a position to be successful as well as Tom did. And that's what set him apart from anybody to ever play the game. And, love him or hate him, he's such a big part of the history of the NFL. And arguably, I don't know that there is anybody you can say has been a bigger part of the fabric of the league than him. It's certainly a piece of the game that we're going to be missing. And, again, love him or hate him, he was a villain if you wanted to root against him, and he was a hero to many. So big part of our game, and he's going to get a well-deserved retirement, and it's not going to be long till 2027 is his first chance to get on the ballot in Canton, and I think he's got a pretty good shot that year of getting it.
For sure. And I want to think about this, Tanner, but do you have a favorite Tom Brady moment that really stands out to you? I think for me, I don't know if it's my favorite, but the most impressive thing I thought he ever did was winning that Super Bowl last year with Tampa. I mean, you think about it, we had COVID, we had a pandemic. He couldn't even really get to meet his teammates and really practice in the same way you would in a normal year. In his first year, he takes them to the playoffs after they started 7-5. People remember he forgot how many timeouts he had against the Bears. They go to the playoffs. They beat my Washington football team in the first round. Then you beat Drew Brees, another Hall of Famer, Aaron Rodgers, another Hall of Famer on the road. And then you beat the defending champion. A lot of people consider them the underdog going into that game on your home turf in Tampa, 31-9. I mean, just a thrashing. I just thought, Tanner, everything that he had to deal with that year, that was the most impressive thing. And probably my favorite moment, honestly, of Tom Brady's. Anything really stand out to you in terms of whether it's something impressive that he did or something, a favorite moment you had of him?
Billy, for me, the first time, and I always knew Tom Brady was a great quarterback. The first time I really thought, wow, this guy's unlike anybody that we've ever seen play was Super Bowl 51 when he engineered that comeback against the Falcons. You don't know of how many other guys could have done that or had that within their capabilities. And for him to do that, for me, that was the moment I really just thought Tom really is in a class of his own. That's where he separated himself in my eyes from the great ones, the Montanas, that group. and he put himself in a class of his own with his 5th ring in that comeback.
Tanner, I wanted to ask you, this is something I really honestly was kind of torn about when I heard this announcement is, do you think he's making the right decision? I mean, I think for me, you look at Tom Brady, I mean, he very well could win the MVP this year. It's kind of a 2-man race between him and Aaron Rodgers, but he's still playing at a high level. I haven't seen anything from him, the way he takes care of his body, the diet that he has, the TB12 diet. There's no reason for me to believe that if he ended up playing next year, he could have played at an incredibly high level. He's in a weak division. I mean, you look at those quarterbacks in that division. The Panthers have Sam Darnold. The Saints have Taysom Hill, and the Falcons have an old Matt Ryan. There's no reason he couldn't have easily won that division. And to me, I mean, if you look at the NFC, there's not that many teams that, I think you have to compete with as opposed to the AFC. You got Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. In the NFC, you really have Aaron Rodgers if he comes back to the Packers, and Matt Stafford. To me, those are kind of the 2 other elite quarterbacks in the NFC. I mean, in my opinion, I was a little bit torn in the sense of, man, if I'm Tom Brady, if I came back next year, I really thought he would have been among the 3-4 teams that you really would have to consider as having a chance to win the Super Bowl again next year. What were your thoughts on that? Do you think he could have come back and at least kept himself in that Super Bowl conversation next year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you have Tom Brady quarterback in your team, I think you can pencil in your maybe top 4 odds, something like that. No lower than top 5, I would say. I think he still has the physical capability to be able to do it, but some of the comments he made this offseason, Bill, it just seemed different to me. He's always said that he'll retire when he sucks. And he doesn't. Like you said, he's in the MVP race. I think he's probably going to end up as the runner-up to Aaron Rodgers this year, but no doubt in my mind he could still go another year or 2 if he wanted to. But he's talked about his wife, his kids, that Giselle needs what she deserves from him as a husband and his kids from him as a dad. And, that's just different, it feels like. It's been so much about Tom as a player, as a competitor, saying, as long as my body still allows me to play, I'll play. And this year he really seemed to go into the offseason with more of a focus on him as a husband and a father rather than as a quarterback and a competitor. And to me, that's why the move's not overly shocking. Is his comments this offseason, they felt different than Tom Brady offseason comments in the past.
Tanner, you might accuse me of being a hater a little bit here, but I have a take that I know a lot of my friends disagree with. And I want to start off by saying I do believe Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, arguably the greatest NFL player ever. And in terms of greatest quarterback of all time, I don't think anyone can really dispute that at this point. But I'm also going to maintain he is not only the GOAT, but the luckiest of all time. And what I mean is, if you look at some of his Super Bowls, look, we all know if Marshawn Lynch runs that ball, that actually would have been Tom Brady's 3rd straight Super Bowl that he would have lost. And then, look, if Kyle Shanahan and the Falcons offense has some better play calling, Falcons run the ball more, they would have won that Super Bowl. There's 2 Super Bowls right there. You look at really all of the Super Bowls with the exception of the one last year, every single game was decided by a possession, 8 points or less. So look, he is the GOAT. You got to give him credit, but I'm not going to lie. I think anybody would be crazy to not say, look, this guy also had maybe some of the greatest luck of all time. And then also you talk about, Spygate and Deflategate and the Tuck rule. There was some luck that played into Tom Brady's career. What do you say about that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I hate the argument that rings make or break a quarterback because, you talk about the Dee Ford offsides call 3 years ago. He may not even get to that Super Bowl and beat the Rams then. There's so much give and take where 1 or 2 plays really hinge on whether he gets a 5th, 6th, 7th ring. So it's why I don't like the argument that, we make or break a guy's career or his legacy on rings. But certainly there's absolutely a case to be made, an alternate world where a few plays go different and Tom doesn't have that many rings. Now, does he still have 3, 4, and is he considered one of the greatest of all time? Absolutely. But absolutely, we got to look at it with the fact that a couple of plays go different. His career is not as a 7-time champion quarterback. But I think that can go the other way too, with the helmet catch, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of ways to work at it. I'm not a believer, Billy, that those things kind of balance themselves out. And in a lot of ways, I think they probably have over the course of his career.
Do you think anyone breaks his 7 Super Bowl ring record? I don't think so, Tanner, because you look at it, especially with the salary cap now. People were saying, oh, Patrick Mahomes is the next GOAT. He's going to win 5, 6, 7 rings. But, they lost to the Bengals a couple days ago, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And, you look at that $500 million contract that he signed, that Mahomes signed, it's going to take a cap hit, in the next couple of years, even more of a cap hit. I think it's up from $7 to $30 million next year. You look at some of these other guys, Aaron Rodgers, as great as he is, he's only been to one Super Bowl. I mean, there's just no guarantee, I think, especially in today's game with the salary cap era. It just incentivizes parity. I don't really see anyone ever breaking his record of 7 Super Bowl rings. What do you say about that?
It's really tough to imagine somebody, you thought that it would be a guy like Mahomes. He just seems like a talent that we haven't seen in our lifetime, and really maybe we haven't seen it in the Super Bowl era. But I tell you, it's the competitive edge of Tom Brady. You rank him in terms of talent amongst active NFL quarterbacks, and he's not going to be necessarily near the top, but he takes care of himself. He puts himself in a position to win both on and off the field, and that's what sets him apart until somebody's willing to make those type of sacrifices, because it was sacrifices a lot of why Tom Brady is exiting with the legacy that he is. Until somebody's willing to do that, nobody's going to break that 7-ring threshold.
Last question on Tom Brady. Do you think there's any chance he might unretire and come back? I mean, we all remember Brett Favre. You do, especially being from the Midwest, how many times he decided to come back after he quote unquote retired. Do you think there's any chance Tom Brady could do that, especially knowing he can still play at a high level? My hot take, I said this to Mitch last week, a former colleague of yours with the Duluth Huskies, that I think if he wants to come back next year, he should sign with his hometown team, the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, look, if Jimmy G is not their quarterback, you can make an argument. And honestly, even if he is their quarterback, a couple plays here and there, they might be in the Super Bowl here instead of the Rams. And they've got Deebo Samuel, they've got George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, they've got a great defense with Nick Bosa on that defensive line. They've got a solid running game. They've got a great coach, I think a top 5 coach in the NFL, and Kyle Shanahan. I mean, to me, you go back home. I think his parents live out there. He would be very close to his family. Really, you're still in the NFC, so all the great quarterbacks, it seems like, are in the AFC. You really only have to worry about playing the Rams twice a year, and that is a tougher division, to be fair, the NFC West. But I mean, look, if you put Tom Brady on the Niners, you still have that same team. I think, again, they're still a Super Bowl favorite for next year. What do you say about that? A, do you think there's any chance he unretires? And B, if he ever did pair up with the Niners, do you think they would be a Super Bowl contender?
I think there's absolutely the possibility that he can come out of retirement. I'm never going to close the door on Tom Brady with that, because as far as being a competitor goes, I believe the only person that can match him or has matched him has been Michael Jordan. And he did it. Michael Jordan came out of retirement. I think if we want to go over to hockey, Mario Lemieux's always kind of been that fighter, his bouts with cancer, still coming back and playing at a high level. Tom has that kind of competitive edge, if not more so than those two guys. So I'm never going to close the door on that possibility. I think San Fran makes a ton of sense. I think that immediately puts them into that category of being a Super Bowl contender if they're not already. Absolutely. I think, again, any team that he goes to, I think absolutely is going to be in that conversation as far as winning a championship. I think he's one of those guys that goes there and immediately elevates you to the status of being a competitor.
Well, great discussion on Tom Brady, of course, the greatest of all time. And I know both me and Tanner will say that we were very fortunate to watch him these last 2 decades or so. So congratulations to Tom Brady, but we'll see if he comes back. You never know with a competitive guy like him. Tanner, let's now transition to what a great weekend this past weekend was with the conference championship games. Really, the last 2 weekends in the NFL playoffs. I mean, the divisional round was probably the best weekend of football I've ever seen with all those great games. And then we only had it follow up again with another great weekend with the Bengals beating the Chiefs in overtime, and you had the Rams beating their divisional rival, the Niners, at home. What was your overall thoughts on this weekend? I mean, let's go to that Chiefs and Bengals game first, I guess. I mean, you look at the Chiefs, they were up 21-3 at one point. They had scored on their first 3 possessions. Everybody thought, man, this is going to be headed for a blowout, but Bengals hung around. They scored a touchdown on a short pass with Samaje Perine that ends up being a long touchdown pass after a dump off. Chiefs unable to score at the half. I mean, they had an opportunity to kick a field goal. Instead, they try to score a touchdown, and Tyreek Hill's not able to get into the end zone, 21-10. And then you just look at that Bengals defense really holding Patrick Mahomes to 3 points in the second half. And how about that offensive line? I mean, everyone talked about how they'd given up 9 sacks to the Titans the week prior, but that couple days ago against the Chiefs, they only give up 1 sack. And Joe Burrow now has a chance after he defeats the Chiefs in overtime to win the Bengals the Super Bowl. I mean, what were your thoughts on that game? I think about as shocking as anything I've ever seen in the NFL playoffs.
Well, let me say that Andy Reid is one of the greatest coaches in the game's history, not just our generation. He's a future Hall of Famer, and he got taken to the cleaners by Zach Taylor. It's not something I saw coming going into Sunday, that Zach Taylor would coach up and down the field, out-coach Andy Reid, but he did, particularly there in the second half. They were missing that that timeout that they burned on the successful challenge on the opening drive of the game. They really missed that late in the first half. Certainly, it was a defining moment for Joe Burrow, seeing what he was able to do and get his team to the Super Bowl. And he's such an easy guy to be a fan of. That Bengal team is so easy to root for. But for me, Billy, the biggest key is what the Bengals did defensively. And I love this. I'm not an analytics nerd. I don't hate analytics. I'm somewhere in between. But my favorite stat from Sunday is that the Bengals dropped 8 into coverage just 24% of the time on Pat Mahomes dropbacks in the first half. Second half, they dropped 8 45% of the time. So they did it nearly twice as much. They dropped 8 back. Pat Mahomes had plenty of time to throw the football. Just nobody could get open. He's back there dancing and scrambling. And those 3 up front for the Bengals, Hubbard, Hill, who had an interception, and Henriksen, boy, they held their own. They really got after Pat. They made him uncomfortable, and just 83 yards of total offense after halftime for the Chiefs. And whatever they did defensively, the Bengals dropping 8 back into coverage and trusting their front 3 to wreak havoc. That to me was the defining moment of the game.
Here's my thing about Tanner. I believe that the Chiefs lost this game, and I place a lot of it on Andy Reid. I mean, you think about it, you're up 21-10, I think, with 5 seconds left to go in the first half. To me, you kick the field goal, and even if you do attempt to play, you've got to tell Patrick Mahomes, you've got to throw that in the end zone. You can't try to dump it off to the side, Tyreek Hill. As fast as he is, I mean, that would have been a tough proposition at that point. And I think Patrick Mahomes had talked Andy Reid out of kicking the field goal. So to me, I mean, that's 3 points right there, and you lose the game by 3. I mean, there's a big difference right there. And then, I mean, even at the end of the game, I mean, they had the ball at the 8-yard line. I mean, people were talking about how Tony Romo said, if you're the Bengals, you might let the Chiefs score in the situation because, they might just run out the clock here and score the game-winning touchdown. But just the series of play calling there at the end, I mean, they had, I think, Mahomes scrambling instead of, I think, managing the clock better and, using that time to try to see if you can really score. If you had to kick a field goal, do it at the last possible second. Actually almost fumbled. I mean, if the Chiefs offensive lineman doesn't recover that ball, the game might have been over in regulation. So what were your thoughts on that? How much of this game do you place on not only the Chiefs collapsing, but on the shoulders of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes?
I'd place the majority of it, in my opinion. Even when they got to overtime and they were set up, they kept trying to go for the home run shot. Pat Mahomes should have been picked off by Eli Apple, and that should have been taken back. The game should have ended. Yet it was the right decision to try to go underneath. It just didn't work out in that particular play, but it was the right decision to go that route. The next play, they try to go for a home run ball, and again, dropping 8 into coverage like they were most of the time for Cincy. It wasn't there, and Pat Mahomes tried to force it. And for all the points that you mentioned, I didn't like the play calling in the most crucial situations. And again, Andy Reid is, in my opinion, one of the greatest to ever do it. I think he'd be the first to tell you that Sunday is a game where play calling on his own right probably cost his team that game.
What do you think, Tanner, about the NFL overtime rules? I mean, this was something that came into play again last weekend, where people were joking as soon as the Chiefs won the toss, all right, the game's over. But hey, give the Bengals credit, their defense held. But do you believe that the NFL needs to change their overtime rules to make sure that each team has one possession? I mean, this happened several times. You talked about it a couple of years ago, Patriots and Chiefs. Patriots got the ball first. They scored. 2 weeks ago, Bills and Chiefs. Chiefs got the ball first. They scored a touchdown. Game was over. Do you believe the NFL needs to change its overtime rules, at least adopt some semblance of the college rules where each team possesses the ball at least one time?
It's funny because I'm actually more open to the current rules than I was a few years ago when the Patriots beat the Chiefs to go to Super Bowl 53. That being said, I do believe we are headed for a change, whether it's warranted or not, because you go back to the divisional round and, ratings wise for the NFL doing so well that weekend, there's no way they don't want Josh Allen to touch the football as well. They want both of those quarterbacks touching the football and keeping that shootout going as long as possible. So I do think we're headed for some kind of change. Now, what should that change be? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the college route. If it was me, I'd rather probably play a full extra quarter, maybe even a 10-minute quarter, and just play that out until the clock gets 0. That's probably my preferred method. But I do think we're headed for a change. Just after what we've seen here the last couple of weeks, and the way that the NFL's been trending toward offense, it was going to be whatever team got the ball first, Chiefs and Bills. because those defenses were not going to stop anybody. They were too gassed at that point. So I think we are headed for a change this offseason. To me, the bigger question is, what is the change going to be?
And moving forward for the Chiefs, big picture, do you think that, would you pick them, for example, right now to be among at least the handful or even the AFC champion next year? I mean, I think your conventional wisdom says yes, but then again, Tanner, I mean, you look at all of these great young quarterbacks in the AFC, again, like Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, who's going to be playing in the Super Bowl in 2 weeks. We'll see who, teams like the Steelers, what they can do. You've got to give teams like the Titans, their respect still. I mean, do you think it's a sole deal that the Chiefs are going to be able to just continue to dominate the AFC, or do you really worry about them long term after just one game, or do you think it's maybe a little bit of an overreaction? Even though they did collapse, it was only one game, and they have been to 4 consecutive AFC championships.
Yeah, I think that core is always going to give them a chance to win. Pat, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, that group is always going to give you a chance when you've got Andy Reid, and Eric Bieniemy somehow still hasn't gotten a head coaching job. Him being there is only going to help. That division is going to get a lot better, though. I tell you what, Justin Herbert, I think, is part of that new young crop of AFC quarterbacks. And you've got the 2 other teams in Vegas and Denver, both getting new head coaches. Both haven't been relevant for a few years, and both are ready to win right now. And I think they're willing to invest what needs to be. And, that division's going to get better. I think in a lot of ways that can help you. That can be beneficial to whoever comes out of it being battle tested. I think Pat Mahomes, Kelce, Hill, Reid, and company, that group is always going to give you a chance to come out of the AFC. But is it going to be the cakewalk that it's been? And maybe I shouldn't even say cakewalk, but is it going to be a given that they're going to be there playing for the AFC championship like it has been the last 4 years? No. I think the rest of the AFC is slowly but surely starting to narrow that gap. And it's not going to be simple. Let me say this. If I had to pick who's going to be hosting the AFC championship next year, Chiefs or the field, I got to take the field.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, I do believe that Patrick Mahomes will win another Super Bowl. But look, I mean, guy like Aaron Rodgers, we know how talented he is. He hasn't even made a Super Bowl since he won the first time. You look at Drew Brees, he didn't make another Super Bowl after he won the first time. I mean, there are these examples. Brett Favre made 2 in a row and never made it again in 20 years. So I do think there are these examples of guys who were super talented but just weren't able to get it done year after year. And all I'm saying is that could be Patrick Mahomes. There's no guarantee. I think he will win a Super Bowl, but there's no guarantee he's going to keep being in that conversation, especially with these young guys. I think that's important to consider. Let's now go to the other conference championship game. That was the Rams and the 49ers. This was a big game. By the way, last week on the podcast with Mitch, I had 49ers and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and obviously both of those teams lost, so that shows you how much I know. But what about this game, Tanner? I mean, the Niners were up 17-7 going into the fourth quarter. You had, of course, that just terrible drop by the Niners cornerback Tart. I mean, if he makes that catch, it doesn't mean the game's necessarily over, but at that point in the game, I mean, they were up 3. He makes that pick. He was already at the 50. I mean, you have to believe the Niners at least get a field goal there, and you never know. You just never know how that game would have ended up, but that was a big drop, and you got to give Matt Stafford a lot of credit. There was a lot of pressure on him in this game where the Rams had lost 6 consecutive to the Niners to get it done at home, get your team to a home Super Bowl, and he ends up with a couple of big throws. It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, rather, when you have the best receiver in the NFL, Cooper Kupp, on your team. He has 2 touchdowns. He's able to lead them down for a game-winning field goal drive at the end. But what are your thoughts on this game? Another exciting game. And, of course, you've got an accomplished quarterback like Matt Stafford going to his first Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time since Wild Card Weekend that a game didn't end on the final play. Quite literally, Billy, that was the worst game we saw in 2 weeks. So I'm very much okay with that as somebody who loves meaningful, competitive football. But I tell you what, almost a calendar year after rescuing Stanford from the purgatory that is the Detroit Lions, he leads them to a Super Bowl. I mean, it's kind of what the storybook kind of ending, what have you. But he provides that big play, big drive quarterback ability they just didn't have with Jared Goff. And, they've given up so many picks. They've gone all in to win this season, and they needed that complementary piece, that guy like Matt Stafford, to do what he was able to do and lead the drives that he did. They don't win that game with Jared Goff, quite simply. I don't know if they win that game or really even get to this point without Odell Beckham Jr. either. I mean, Cooper Kupp is obviously the number 1 wide receiver on that team, but adding Odell Beckham Jr. played such big dividends. I think maybe it was a little bit of a slow start his first couple of games in a Rams uniform, but he was huge down the stretch during the postseason. And I tell you what, that team just found a way to get it done. And ultimately, I think they're a more complete roster than the 49ers. I think you've got some serious questions going into their offseason, what they do, especially at the quarterback position. But, if you're the Rams, this is it. This is your window. You've got how many draft picks the next 3 years? Not many. It all comes down to this game here in 12 days. And it's seeing what this guy, Stafford, that, you brought in for this purpose. Now you put him on this stage. Can he deliver?
Yeah, Stafford needed to win this game against the 49ers. I mean, you make it to the NFC Championship game, you lose to Brady, that's understandable. You lose to Aaron Rodgers, that's understandable. If you lost to Jimmy G with Brady and Rodgers already out of the way, I mean, that would have been, I think, a big red flag on your career. And like you mentioned, I mean, Odell Beckham, what a resurgence. I think, honestly, his resurgence speaks more about the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield and the state that team is in, that they weren't able to really make use of. I think one of the best receivers in the game when he's healthy, when he's on his game. So it's great to see him have a chance to win his first Super Bowl, similar to how Antonio Brown was able to win one last year. I want to talk about the Niners, Tanner. How much of this blame do you think is placed on Jimmy G? I mean, here's a guy that I think a lot of people rightfully so hated. I mean, but he's able to come into these playoffs, beat Dallas at home, beat Aaron Rodgers on the road, and get to this point. They're up 17-7. Now he doesn't play defense to give him credit, to be fair to him rather, but it just felt like he didn't make the big throws when they needed him the most. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I saw a stat where, Deebo Samuel, one of the most dynamic players in the game, certainly the best offensive player on your team, only touched the ball one time in the fourth quarter. That can't happen. But how much of this blame do you place on Jimmy G? How much of this loss, rather, do you place on Jimmy G?
He's a consistent quarterback in the sense that he wins a lot of games, but is that necessarily to his own doing? Now he has at least one just inexcusable dumb mistake every game, and unfortunately for them, it came on the last offensive play of the game on Sunday. He's a guy that is consistent for you, but he's not going to go down and win you a game like Stafford. And the Rams knew that. They knew they had a team to win, and they had Jared Goff at quarterback. They went out and addressed their quarterback need, and the 49ers didn't. And that's why, in my opinion, the Rams are where they are. San Francisco is going to have a lot of tough decisions to make this offseason. But, I think it became very clear to everybody that once the Rams took that lead late, and it was up to Jimmy Garoppolo to lead them down the field and at least tie, if not game go-ahead drive late in the game, that he wasn't going to do it. I don't know that there was a lot of people who realistically thought the Niners were going to get it done at that point. And if your aspirations truly are a Super Bowl, when you've got a top, like you said, I agree, a top 5 head coach in Kyle Shanahan, you've got a roster built to win. You can't have that. You gotta make the move that the Rams did and go out and get the quarterback you do trust in those big game decision moments.
For sure. To be fair to Jimmy G, I mean, he did have 2 touchdown passes, and I do think even with that interception he threw late, I mean, if that ball is incomplete, if he was sacked, I mean, he'd be looking at a 4th and 25. I think it was going to be a loss of 12. So, I mean, you do have Deebo Samuel, so you never know, but I think the chances of them picking up that first down would have been minuscule. But like you said, I mean, just kind of, even when they're up 17-7 with him at quarterback, you never really felt like they could put the Rams away. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I kind of wanted to go there. Do you think the Niners move off of Jimmy G? If you so, I mean, who do you think they get? Do you think they're able to trade for Aaron Rodgers? Because, people forget Aaron Rodgers is not a free agent. The Packers have to agree to the trade. And I mean, I highly doubt they'd want to trade him in conference. But, what do you think the Niners do? Maybe they try to get Brady to come out of retirement. I'm not really sure. Do you think they move on from Jimmy G? Do you think you give Trey Lance a shot? See how he looks like? Because, again, I mean, say what you want about Jimmy G. He did help get this team to the NFC Championship game this year, even if he may not have been the leader.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to like about Jimmy G. The guy does win games. He's not a bad quarterback, but he's not the fit with San Francisco right now. I do think they move on. Whether that's Trey Lance or not, I don't know. I'm not sure. Is Trey Lance ready? I think you have to bring in some kind of veteran to push him through camp. You get the chance to go get Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. You absolutely take it. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, I think that they're excited, and they should be excited about what they have in Trey Lance. But I think you need some kind of push to bring that out of him. It's felt like Jimmy's been auditioning for his next role throughout most of this season. I do think he plays somewhere else next year, and I do mean that. I think he plays somewhere next year. I do think there's a spot for him in the NFL. It's just not with San Francisco, not with that roster built the way it is and built to win now.
My hot take, I don't even know if it's really a hot take, but as a Washington fan, I would love to see the Washington football team trade for Jimmy G. I think that'd be a great fit. You're in the NFC East, which is already, not that great of a division. You put in Jimmy G, I think that really brings stability to your quarterback position. So as a Washington fan, I'm saying trade for Jimmy G, but we'll see what happens, and we'll see what the Niners decide to do with their quarterback situation. But let's move on, Tanner, to really our first look at this Super Bowl. And man, am I excited for this game. Rams and Bengals, it's going to be in LA. How about this? The first, 53 Super Bowls, the home team of the host stadium never made it. And now the last 2 years, we've had the Bucs make it and we've had the Rams make it. So how about that? You've got 2 4 seeds. I believe I was looking this up. This was the first time that a Super Bowl will not have a top 3 seed in either conference representative since the NFL introduced seeding in 1975. So how about that? I mean, so many great storylines in this game. Matt Stafford, the accomplished veteran, against the young phenom Joe Burrow, who, if he wins this Super Bowl, will become the first player to win the Heisman National Championship and the Super Bowl, and also would do it in the span of 3 years, because remember, 2 years ago, he won the Heisman and the National Championship with LSU. I mean, so many great things you can see about this game. I mean, Rams are trying to win this Super Bowl for the first time since '99 when Kurt Warner led that team. I don't know if you saw that movie, but I've heard it's good, so I'll definitely watch it sometime. The Bengals, I mean, we all know they made the playoffs under Marvin Lewis in the 16 years he was there, but never won a playoff game. They were 0-7 and really hadn't made an AFC Championship game, I don't think, since '88. And the 2 times they were in the Super Bowl in the '80s, they lost to Joe Montana and that great Niners team. So, Tanner, what do you think about the Super Bowl? I mean, what are some of the great storylines you are looking forward to seeing in 12 days here when these 2 teams kick off?
Well, the biggest for me is how that offensive line for Cincinnati can hold up against this pass rush. They did bounce back. I'll give them a ton of credit after allowing 9 sacks, and then Burrow was on the ground a couple of times when plays got waved off against Tennessee. They bounced back and played a clean game on Sunday against Kansas City. I give them a ton of credit. Now you're going to up the bar. Okay? Everything's magnified with the Super Bowl, but especially when you've got Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, Von Miller on the other side, everything's going to get amped up. So can they do it again? Can they give Joe Burrow time to make the plays that we know he's capable of doing? And then defensively, that secondary, somehow they were able to lock up Kelsey and Hill and Mecole Hardman, Byron Pringle and company. They were able to do that long enough that Pat Mahomes' back there dancing was not nearly as effective in the second half. Can they do it again going up against the likes of Kupp and OBJ and Tyler Higbee, Van Jefferson, guys like that? It's crazy to think, if Robert Woods was still healthy, what he would add, what kind of element he would bring to the table. So those to me are the biggest keys. Cincinnati's offensive line and their secondary, what kind of a matchup they can put forth against the Rams. I think on paper, you got to say the Rams are the favorite. And last I saw, the line had the Rams at 4. But, I tell you, this is a Bengal team that continues to defy all odds. I think they relish that underdog role. And it's just going to be a fun Super Bowl with a lot of storylines, including the young phenom quarterback and the guy, the veteran in Stafford that you wanted to see him succeed. He's had the talent for how long, but finally gets his chance to succeed. And it's a feel-good Super Bowl in a lot of ways, and most of us probably aren't Bengals or Rams fans, but we're just going to enjoy the holiday that Super Bowl Sunday kind of is, So I look forward to it. I love Super Bowl Sunday, and I love it a little bit more with this matchup.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is going to be a matchup of 2 great offenses. With the Rams, you've got Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp in the backfield. You've got a number of different options, and Tyler Higbee as well, tight end. With the Bengals, you've got these young phenoms like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Uzoma and Boyd. I mean, I think you just got 2 dynamic offenses. My number one hope, Tanner, is that we have a game similar to the Bills and Chiefs, where you've got a really high-scoring game, and then someone leads their team down the field late and wins the game. I really thought. And this is part of the why I thought last year's Super Bowl with the Bucs and Chiefs was so disappointing, because I really thought we were going to get that type of Super Bowl. And then it just ended up being a blowout in the Bucs defensive line mauling Patrick Mahomes. So I really hope that we can get that type of high scoring, exciting Super Bowl that we kind of got with the Eagles and the Patriots a few years ago. Although I would say that was a little bit different because you didn't have the big names like you had Nick Foles as one of the quarterbacks. I mean, here I feel like you've got enough big names to really bring a cachet. It's in Hollywood, so you feel like it's a perfect Hollywood story. And that's where I want to go with my next question, Tanner, is what do you think would be a better story if Matt Stafford wins the Super Bowl after all of those years he suffered in Detroit, or if Joe Burrow, the young phenom, ends up winning the Super Bowl, like I talked about, second championship in 3 years after the national championship at LSU? I mean, I think this is a lot harder of a question than you might think initially. I mean, I might go as far as to say I think Joe Burrow, if he's able to pull this off the way the Bengals have been able to advance in this playoffs, you've got the legendary kicker Evan McPherson, kicking a game-winning field goal every round. I mean, even the Raiders game, you could argue. I mean, it wasn't if they were favored, it wasn't by much. I mean, their Cinderella run to get to the Super Bowl. I'd almost make an argument if Joe Burrow wins the Super Bowl, not that he needs the Super Bowl more, but if he wins this game, that will end up being the better story.
I agree with you, and I don't think there's a wrong answer here. Stafford had spent so much of his career in Detroit after being the number one overall pick, doesn't win a playoff game till this year. Of course, you'll be happy for him. I think most NFL fans will, and they'd like to see Stafford eventually get the ring, if not this year. But Joe Burrow, man, all he does is win. He's a guy that kind of came from humble beginnings. He's very open about it, how much he loves his hometown in rural Ohio, how it's kind of a poverty-stricken area. He was able to come out of that, got onto the team at Ohio State, but didn't play, goes to LSU, becomes a winner, gets to the NFL as a number one overall pick, suffers adversity there, has a season-ending injury, and he's found a way to battle back. And to me, that's Hollywood type of material right there, that all it needs is a Super Bowl ring at the end of it. So I don't think there's a wrong answer. But man, I tell you, I think if Hollywood had their choice, what could they make that next Kurt Warner movie out of, which I saw, by the way, this weekend? Very good, and I recommend it. I think Hollywood's going that route at Joe Burrow and just putting the finishing touches on that story with the Super Bowl ring.
On the flip side, how much pressure do you think Matt Stafford is under to win this game? I mean, look, like I said, he had to get to the Super Bowl this year, especially once Brady and Rodgers were eliminated. And honestly, I mean, look, the Rams are like you said, favored by 4 points. I think that's probably about right. I think the Rams on paper have the better team. Now, again, that's why you don't play on paper. You play the actual games. But, Tanner, I just think, look, I mean, there's no guarantee what you're going to do, what you're going to be able to put together next year. You look at some of these aging guys like Von Miller that you were traded for, but, he's getting up there in age. You mentioned it earlier. They don't have a lot of draft picks coming up. I mean, I think to me, look, if Matt Stafford doesn't win this Super Bowl, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but there's a chance. I mean, you could talk about it. He may not win, not only win it ever again, but ever get to a Super Bowl again, especially like we talked about all the great young quarterbacks that are coming up. And you look at guys like Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert who are dynamic, and they didn't even make the playoffs. So I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be like hyperbole here, but the hyperbole king, but I think there is a shot that Matt Stafford doesn't win this Super Bowl. He may not ever get back. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're onto something, especially as a member of the Rams. The Rams in no likelihood aren't going to be in this situation here in the coming years. So there's absolutely pressure on Stafford. I think, though, if there's anybody on that Rams roster who's got more pressure on him right now, is probably Sean McVay. He's always been one of the top coaches, it feels like, since he's come into the league and made a name for himself. But he got to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. They laid an egg offensively. Everyone said, okay, well, Jared Goff is your quarterback. It's to be expected. That excuse is gone. Now he's at the point where he's got his quarterback. He's got a roster built to win now, and it's not going to get much better for him here in the near future. After this game here in a couple of weeks, they're going to be closer to a rebuild than they are to a Super Bowl. So I do think there's pressure on Stafford, but if there's anybody who's really feeling the heat in LA, I think it's Sean McVay.
Also, you look at his last Super Bowl. I mean, he's built on this sort of persona of who he's the golden boy. He's this young offensive genius. In your first Super Bowl against Bill Belichick and the Patriots, he only scored 3 points. So I think you're absolutely right there. Sean McVay does have a lot of pressure on him going into this game and coaching against really an unproven coach himself, Zach Taylor. I mean, look, he's done a good job getting this team to the Super Bowl, but I think if you're looking at who's more proven in terms of their resume, there's no question it's Sean McVay. So I do believe you there. Agree with you that, he's under a lot of pressure. Tanner, I know we're 12 days out, but if you had to pick right now, again, this could change, but the day before the game or the day of the game, of course, but right now, who are you leaning towards between the Rams and the Bengals? Give me a team you think wins, give me a score, and then give me an MVP.
Like you said, it's you don't play these games on paper, because if that was the case, I'd probably pick the Rams. But don't you just have this feeling Evan McPherson is going to do something special? Like it just got to end with a McPherson game-winning field goal, doesn't it? So man, I'm gonna, just for the sake of giving you an answer, and again, I don't know, things can change here in the course of a week and a half or whatever leading up to it. I'm going to go Bengals 27-24, and Joe Burrow's got to get the MVP. It's got to be the way to get that storybook in.
I will save my pick until next week, but right now, I mean, I'm leaning towards the Bengals, but we'll see what happens in a week. But I mean, I agree with you. This will not be a cakewalk for the Rams. Joe Burrow and company will make it tough for them. And again, both you and I agree, as having been in the broadcast booth, we just want a great game, and we hope that that will be the case here on February 13th. By the way, speaking of broadcast booth, it will also, in all likelihood, based on reporting, will be Al Michaels' final Super Bowl, because it looks like he will either join Amazon, or people have even said Monday Night Football on ESPN. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm curious, Tanner, other than the game, I mean, is there a favorite part of the game that you like, whether it's the halftime show? I know we have Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Mary J. Blige, and Kendrick Lamar this year for the halftime show. The national anthem always typically seems to be iconic. You've got the commercials, of course. You got the Super Bowl party, the different Super Bowl snacks that people bring. I mean, is there any, other than the game, is there anything about the Super Bowl that you really enjoy that you're looking forward to in a couple of weeks?
Oh, it's the snacks for sure. It's getting together with your friends, your loved ones, you're partying. But I think, like you said, all the above. I think it's an ensemble. I'm not going to live or die by the national anthem or the halftime show. Commercials I enjoy. There's always some companies that are going to bring it with their Super Bowl commercials. So yeah, I'll enjoy it, but more than anything, it's getting a good game. Like you said, that's what we're there for. That's what we're hoping for. But if I can have a couple of tasty snacks and a couple of cold ones with my loved ones, that's what it matters. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I agree with you. Super Bowl parties are great, and I love the commercials as well. But I'm sure this happens at your parties too, as well as mine. There's always got to be that group of people, and I'm in this group that really is focused on the game. You might have some other people there that are there for the community and there to have the food, which is all good and well. But when it comes down to it, this real sports fans like you and me are really focused on the game. So hopefully they'll give us a good one. The Rams and Bengals will in a couple of weeks. But Tanner, you've been so gracious with your time here, and as we transition to close, I want to talk about what's going on with you. Like I talked about when we last talked, back in July of 2020. You were at the time the ESPN radio host in Marquette, Wisconsin, covering Michigan high school sports and really everything going on in that state. But relatively recently, you've transitioned to, like I mentioned, being the voice of the University of Minnesota Volleyball, as well as the studio host for Minnesota football. So really take me through kind of how this whole process happened and how you were able to get this position.
Yeah, I tell you, Billy, it's really been a dream come true, and it's been a tremendous blessing for me. When I was a senior in college, I went up to the U of M. I got the opportunity to job shadow their men's basketball broadcast team for a home game against the Iowa Hawkeyes. The play-by-play man there, who's since become one of my good friends, is from a small Iowa town, just like me. We went to two schools that are actually conference rivals at the Division III level, so tiny schools of less than 1,000 students. And he saw a lot of himself in me and wanted to give me that opportunity. Fast forward a few years, and this position opens up. St. Thomas, of course, in the Twin Cities, just went Division I. The person I replaced left for that job recently, and this opening happened over the summer. They remembered me, and they reached out to me and asked if this was something I'd be interested in. So the position is being the play-by-play voice of Golden Gopher Volleyball, and then being the studio host for Gopher football games. Now that includes, as needed, filling in for men's and women's basketball, hockey, play-by-play, what have you. But primarily, it's broadcasting volleyball and then football for me. So it's been tremendous. I've really enjoyed my first season. Of course, Gopher Volleyball is always going to be right there. They have a tremendous program that Hugh McCutcheon, former Olympian head coach, has built. Two-time reigning Big Ten Player of the Year, and they've had the Big Ten Player of the Year 5 of the last 7 seasons. So it was fantastic covering them. They're always going to be competitive, and making it to the Elite Eight this year was really special to follow them down that journey. And The football team has been really fun to be able to get inside and kind of meet those guys, meet those coaches. I've had lunch with PJ Fleck. I tell you, people have their opinions about him. They can say that he's kind of let's say hyper, I think is a way I think a lot of people would probably describe PJ. He is. But let me say this about him. He's genuine. He's one of those genuine people I've ever met. People will say that he's, got antics, that he's, kind of hyper over there in the sideline. I'll say this. He loves his players and he loves what he does. All the row the boat stuff. That's just who he is. He's someone I respect a lot because he's a genuine guy who cares about his community, cares about his players. Can he rub people the wrong way? Absolutely. But he loves where he is. He wants to be at Minnesota. I really think highly of him, and it's been great getting to know him as well as the rest of the coaches. Bob Motzko on the hockey side just lost his son in a car accident over the past year, and he's a tremendous person. Lindsay Whalen, former WNBA champion, graduated from the U of M, and she's been outstanding. I've really enjoyed getting to know her on the women's basketball side. And Ben Johnson, Minnesota native, and played for the Gophers, was a standout before becoming a coach. Everyone has been outstanding, and that I've gotten to cover and work with. And then my broadcast team, I can't say enough about them. Is just it's outstanding, to really be a part of something special like that and to be around professionals and just hanging out afterwards. We'll hang out for maybe an hour or so after we get off air just because we enjoy each other's company and being a part of all that. So I love where I am. I tell you what, I'm really blessed to have the position that I do, and I'm hoping for continued success with the Gophers going forward.
Well, that's great to hear. Like I've told you this before, you have one of the best voices for radio that I've ever heard, and obviously you're a great guy as well. So very happy for your success and to see where you continue to go from here. And to close out the podcast, similar to how we did last time, Tanner, I kind of want to do an express round with you to close it out. Again, you don't have to give one word to these answers, but you get the idea here. I'll ask you a question and then give me your thoughts on it. So my first question is, where do you think Aaron Rodgers plays next year? Do you think he returns to the Packers? Or do you think he plays somewhere else like the Broncos? And if you do think he plays somewhere else, we'll go out on a limb here. Who do you think he ends up playing for?
If I had to pick the Packers or the field right now, I would say the field. I don't know. It's hard for me to see him in a Broncos uniform. But there are some teams that, let me just throw out a hot take at you. Let me say the New York Giants. I think they could be a team that, they're frustrated because they're a New York market. There's pressure on them. I know I'm not being express here, I'm not being quick, but you know what? I think that they're willing to do anything that it takes. And maybe that's Aaron Rodgers.
I thought the Packers were likely where he was going to return until I saw today the cap hit, if he stays, is going to be 46.5. And you'd honestly have to try to franchise tag Davante Adams. I predict if I had to pick right now, I think he ends up getting traded to Denver. And Davante Adams ends up signing there as a free agent. But you never know. I mean, a lot of stuff, it's not just an easy trade there. It's got a lot of hurdles have to be passed for that to happen. So we'll see what happens. But you and I both agree he will not be in Green Bay next year. I wanted to ask you this because I actually looked this up. You are a fan of the Twins, the Celtics. You don't have an NFL team, but I know that your family is full of Vikings fans. And, of course, you're a big Notre Dame fan. I wanted to talk about the Vikings for a second, because you would have a perspective on this again because you're from a family of Vikings fans. It was reported recently that Jim Harbaugh spent National Recruit Signing Day interviewing with the Vikings. Do you think Jim Harbaugh ends up going to the Vikings? And if you so, what are your expectations for the team? I mean, of course, here's a guy who had a lot of success with Colin Kaepernick and Alex Smith in San Francisco, took him to a Super Bowl, arguably could have won that game against his brother John. And, if Aaron Rodgers leaves the Packers, I mean, I think Kirk Cousins, as limited as he is, I mean, he's the best bet right now in that division outside of Aaron Rodgers. So, Jim Harbaugh, do you think there's any truth to the reporting that he would go to Minnesota Vikings? And if so, if he ends up going, how far do you think he'd be able to take him next year?
Well, I tell you, just to set the record, I'm born kind of into Vikings fandom and being up in the U. I'll lean toward the Vikings. My favorite player growing up, though, was Eli Manning. So I was partial to the Giants for a long time. That being said, absolutely. If the Vikings offered Jim Harbaugh, he's taken the job. There's a lot of reason to think that the Vikings are going to be the team to beat in the North next year, especially if Rodgers and Adams are gone in Green Bay. Chicago and Detroit aren't there yet. Minnesota's got weapons. I mean, they're a lot better on that roster than the record would show. And Harbaugh has nothing left to prove at Michigan. You know, a year ago, fans were calling for his head. He's taken a pay cut to stay at his alma mater. This year, he's beaten Ohio State. He's won a Big Ten, and he made the college football playoff. In the modern era, I don't know that Michigan can honestly do better. Honestly, I don't. I think this is probably the peak in the modern era of football. You know, because what's the next step? A national championship? I don't think that's a quick fix for Michigan. So I think he's done everything he can there, and I think it's time for him to go to the NFL. I think he knows that. And if the Vikings and I think the Dolphins have interest in him, if either of them offers, I think that's the move that he makes.
What's one team in the NFL, and it could be a team that made the playoffs and was bounced early, or maybe didn't make the playoffs either, you think we have to watch for them next year? Maybe you're not saying they're your dark horse Super Bowl contender, but you would say, I mean, this is a team that people are forgetting about that next year they could make a lot of noise.
You know, I really would have liked to see what the Vikings could have done if they got into the playoffs this year, because they've got the weapons, they've got the talent to beat anybody, in my opinion. You know, that a skill position group offensively is as good as you'll find in the NFL. You can say what you want about Kirk Cousins, but he'll give you a chance to win. He'll be a consistent quarterback. Offensive line is a work in progress, but it's getting better. They've got contracts to restructure, especially on the defensive line. They've paid Michael Pierce, Robinson, some of those guys. They've paid them how much money to play a combined 13 games over 3 years. You know, they've got some pieces to retool for sure, but man, I would have liked to seen them get into the playoffs, because they're a dangerous team with the roster they have right now, and I think they're going to continue to trend in the right direction.
I agree with that. I mean, and if you look at Jim Harbaugh, going back to your point about him, I mean, I don't think they're beating Ohio State year in and year out. I think this is the perfect time to go. You've proven you can beat them. And I think with the Vikings, I mean, you mentioned they've got a lot of offensive weapons: Dalvin Cook, Thielen, Jefferson, Kirk Cousins. You know, he's a stable quarterback. I think, look, he can make some noise with them. I'm going to go with the team people I think are forgetting about. That's the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, Lamar Jackson is as dynamic of a player there is in the NFL. He's actually my favorite player right now. So I also root for the Ravens. And I think people are forgetting about him because he was hurt for a good portion of the year. They missed the playoffs. I mean, look, the Ravens, I think, lost their last 4 games by 1 possession or less, and that was with all the injuries they had, not just Lamar Jackson. I mean, they lost their running backs at the beginning of the season. You know, if they win even one of those games, they make the playoffs, and if Lamar comes back, you never know what can happen. So I think people are sleeping on the Ravens, especially with the attention the Bengals have gotten making the Super Bowl. I would say watch out for Lamar Jackson. You are a big Notre Dame fan. I'm probably safe to say that's probably your biggest, the main team I think you root for. What's your solution, Tanner, to fixing the college football playoff? I mean, you know, Notre Dame has been in there a few times, but it just seems like, unlike the NFL, it really is only a couple of teams every year that you really feel like has a legit shot of winning the national championship. I mean, I know Georgia won for the first time in 40 years, but they've been in that group that has been right there to be able to win the national championship. You've got Alabama, Clemson, you know, when Dabo Swinney and the Tigers have a solid year, Ohio State, Oklahoma. I mean, it really seems like it's only a select few. And even teams like Notre Dame, who have been able to make the playoffs, haven't been able to break through. My school, Virginia Tech, has definitely not been able to break through, but they're a respectable program. But they haven't really been able to make noise, especially in this college football playoff era. Do you think it's time to expand the playoff? I mean, do you think there's anything college football can do to expand, to increase parity, or are you of the mindset, look, the best schools are going to continue to recruit the best players? It's up to teams like Notre Dame to eventually over-recruit them and rather overtake them in these playoffs.
You know, Notre Dame has been a big part of my life, you know, as a fan, but my allegiance is to the U of M. Still partial Notre Dame, though. I still support them. But I tell you what, you're right. There's only a couple of teams, 2, maybe 3 or 4, even in a given year, that can win a national championship. That being said, it's more meaningful football if you expand, and I think that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. And the hang-up seems to be whether you play those first-round games on neutral sites, campus sites. How many buys do you give? Do only conference champions qualify for buys? You know, if you go that way, then you're really putting the pressure on Notre Dame to join a conference. And why do you want to do that? Because of the way that they schedule. And if that's not an issue, which it wouldn't be if you expanded, then why is it necessary? So ultimately, I do think it comes down to more meaningful football than it does as to getting teams into the playoff because 7, 8 teams can win a championship. They can't, but it ultimately means that there's more meaningful football, and that's what it comes down to. So 8, 12, I think is where we're going to end up being. Again, that hang up is whether we're going to get campus site games for the first round, the 5 through 12 seeds, or what it may be. But we've needed it for a long time now. And as football fans, we need it. The game, the sport, maybe it doesn't need it, but it can only benefit it, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I think the top teams are still going to win, but if you increase the playoff, you'll have, I think, more fan interest, especially at the end of the season in these college football playoffs. Do you have a favorite broadcaster? I mean, I know we talked about Al Michaels earlier. You grew up in the Midwest. There's a lot of great, broadcasters that come from the Midwest. Joe Buck, most notably, the NFL and MLB #1 announcer on Fox. Any favorites that you have that you really tried to emulate or at least grew up listening to in the booth?
Yeah, I take what I try to do is take the best from a lot of guys I listen to, and certainly I have a lot of influences, like you mentioned, Joe Buck. His voice just screams big game. Whenever he's on the mic, it's must watch TV. Let me give you kind of it might be a dark horse answer, but especially when I was at ESPN early in my career, my favorite broadcaster there has always been Sean McDonough. Always enjoyed a game that Sean McDonough calls. He's versatile. I think he's knowledgeable of the game, and he can be dynamic without going over the top. I just always really enjoy a game that he calls.
That's a great pick right there. For me, I'm a fan, and this is why I think what makes baseball so special is that you really get to know and connect with your local broadcaster. So I'm a big fan of the Nationals TV voice, Bob Carpenter. Nationally, I mean, I think it's hard to go against a guy like Al Michaels. He's been doing it forever. I read his book. If you ever have a chance to read, I think it's called "You Can't Make This Up." I mean, he's had a storied career. He gets to potentially end his last Super Bowl. I think it'd be his 10th Super Bowl. He's calling it in his hometown of LA. I think what he's been able to do has been incredible. 2 more questions for you, Tanner. I wanted to go back to our days in the Northwoods League, and you obviously, the year that you were there, the Duluth Huskies had a great year. They went to the the summer baseball championship, made it to the finals, ended up losing. But was there one game that really stands out to you? I mean, that you really think, man, that was such a great game to call. You were behind the booth and you got to see the Huskies pull off a great game in that terrific season that they had while you were broadcasting their games.
I think back, and you might have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Billy, because they might have been playing lacrosse in that game where they were down 8-4 and they're going to the bottom of the 11th inning and came back to walk it off. And I didn't I didn't see any path forward once they gave up those 4 runs in the top half of the inning to come back. And I think that's when that team really started believing. They went on that run midway through the season, and they really started believing that we've got the ability to do something special here. I think they knew they were good, but seeing something like that, I think that's really what inspired them and got them believing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if I can pick one game, but man, those battles against the Duluth Huskies for the Loggers, I mean, were great, especially at Duluth. I mean, you know how that ballpark is. It's very old and very historic. I mean, those were some of my favorite moments broadcasting in the Northwoods League and getting to meet guys like you and Mitch, who I still keep in touch with, Ari, and a lot of good guys on that team, especially from the broadcasters. And my final question for you, Tanner, you've been so gracious with your time. We're almost an hour into this podcast, but you are from the great state of Iowa, and of course, like you mentioned, from a small town in Iowa as well. And honestly, most of my viewers are probably going to be from the East Coast, but A, how would you describe the state of Iowa to someone who's never been there? And B, especially from your hometown, or even just your home state, I mean, if there's one thing, if someone was coming to visit you, where you would take them, is it like a actual tourist place, like a city or a town? Is it some sort of food you'd want them to eat? I mean, what are some big things that scream Iowa to you?
Well, let me say this is that Iowa, in my opinion, can be split into 2 halves that you're going to find very different types of Iowa from each side of the state. You can go to the western half. That's where I am. I'm closer to Omaha and Sioux Falls than I am to Des Moines. That's going to be more agricultural, farmland, cornfields. That's what you're, think of when you think Iowa. And you get out to the east is where you have more of the universities. You've got a lot of the banking industry is out there. It's a lot more what people would probably consider modern out there. Now, if you were to come to my hometown, which again is probably about 90 minutes northeast of Omaha, my hometown is very much an outlier as compared to the rest of the state in the sense that my high school was 70% non-Caucasian was the makeup. My high school had 24 different languages that were spoken. So we had a unique opportunity here that I thought was really cool, especially with the events of the world here over the last years. We got exposed to a lot of different cultures and points of view early on in our lives. And, that's something not everyone gets, that kind of opportunity. And, it gives you a real sense of perspective. And, it's, to me, that's something that you don't get everywhere. We have a Hispanic food restaurant in town that has been featured nationally, was named one of the top 10 Mexican food restaurants in America. But it's very much this small town mom and pop, or not even a company maybe, but a business that just makes tremendous food. Whenever someone comes through, that is a must stop. President Obama, when he was visiting Iowa during his reelection, came and stopped by, and there's his picture on the wall. And it's fantastic. That's the place where we were back in high school. That's where everyone goes after the Friday night game. And it's you build lifelong friendships there, and great food to go with it. So that's how I would describe my hometown. As you think about whatever your stereotype is about Iowa. And it's not that. It's got a lot of culture, a lot of uniqueness to it. Just very blessed, very grateful to be where I'm from.
Well, that's definitely great to hear that. Tanner, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you and catch up and hear about all your different insights and have a chance to talk about the NFL playoffs, from Tom Brady to the Super Bowl with the Rams and Bengals, and then making our picks here, and obviously getting to hear some of your takes in the express round. But thank you so much for joining me, man. This is such a pleasure. Best of luck to you as you continue your broadcasting journey. You're an up-and-coming broadcaster, but even more importantly, a better guy. So really thank you so much for taking the time here to chat with me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Billy. It's always great talking to you, and really appreciate you having me on. Best of luck, brother.
For sure. That is Tanner Hoops, University of Minnesota broadcaster, joining me on the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.